Tara Bushaw, you are a mother of eight, a homeschooling family, and founder of Freelancers on Fire. Welcome to the More Than Your Age podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Well, for those who may have not caught it in the intro, you are a mother of eight. I am insanely impressed that you have eight children. It is very rare to have big families these days, let alone eight children. Did you always know that you wanted eight kids or a big family?
A fun fact, I didn't want kids. I will say I didn't have very long to think about that decision though, but I was the type I didn't like babysitting. I didn't like when my parents' friends would come over with their kids. Like I just wanted my space. And so I always said I don't want kids. But I ended up having my first baby at 15. So I didn't have a whole lot of time and space there to actually make that decision. So yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you were 15 years old. I'm so curious. What did that look like for you, and how were people towards you? How did they treat you when this happened so
Yeah.
young?
So back when it happened, it was 1993, 1994, and it was still kind of taboo that you would be a teenager in school, being pregnant. And so the school was very much like, we're going to provide you a teacher. You can be at home, and we're just going to send a teacher to you because they didn't want me to be that influence on other students, which is fine. For my family, though, devastating, obviously. I grew up with my parents were together for over 50 years. So, they had a strong, solid marriage. I grew up in the Catholic faith. And so, as you can about imagine, it was complete devastation for my parents that this would happen. I got pregnant 2 months after my 15th birthday, gave birth a month before my 16th birthday. So it was quite the challenge, so to speak. I lost a lot of my friends, but the ones that remained, it was a good test to who were my true friends. And also, I understood that parents looked at me and were like, she's a bad influence, you can't be around her. And so that was, that was some of the reason why some of those friends didn't stick around. But, it is what it is. But it was a lesson learned for sure. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I bet you wouldn't. So when you were homeschooling, you're basically being isolated. Is this, I mean, and you're also experiencing pregnancy, and you don't have any peers to ask like, hey, what do is this normal? So how was that like for you just as a teenager in this isolation and then also being a first time mom?
It was strange, because I literally just quit playing with Barbies 3 years before that, but it was just, I didn't really have a choice, I just had to do it. And my mom was a great support. She was obviously, very disappointed as any mother would be when their 15-year-old is pregnant, but she was very supportive. She was definitely my rock. Anything that I needed, she made sure that, my questions were answered. There were programs surprisingly back then, like with the county health department and social services and things like that. And even at the school, they had like alternative learning, but they were all very supportive. My high school, even at that time, were starting a teen parent daycare. And so I knew that I would be able to continue with my schooling because there was this daycare that was available in the community, and I knew I'd be able to be part of that. And so they did have a program for young teen moms. So there were some girls that were pregnant, but they were a little bit older. They were 16, 17, some 18-year-olds. So I did have some support in that sense. I wasn't close friends really with any of them, but it was still this opportunity that I had to get together, with this weekly meeting or whatever that we did. When I did graduate, I ended up graduating a year early because I had that teacher coming to my house. And so I was able to work ahead. I was able to do all these things. So I actually ended up graduating with these older girls that were pregnant or had kids as well. And so I want to say there were like in graduation, because I was bumped up, there were like 6 or 7 of us ultimately that were either pregnant at the time of graduation or that already had babies. So I wasn't 100% isolated. I was from my same age peers, but I did have some that were a little bit older than me that were there if I had questions.
Yeah, that's good. So when you graduated high school, Did you go straight to college? Did you go straight into the workforce? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I went into the workforce, but I also went to college. So I graduated that May and I went to college that September. I graduated 3 days before my 17th birthday. So I started college then, early on at 17. And I went to a university initially and I had a really tough time trying to juggle all the things. I mean, I was 17-year-old mom of a 1-year-old and working and living on my own. And so I only finished out that first semester and then I dropped out. And then I didn't go back to college until maybe 3 years later. And then at that time I had a second baby. And so she had some health issues. So eventually I ended up quitting that too. And it wasn't until 2012 that I finally got my degree. And that was, yeah. So it was a long road, but it finally happened. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you started a freelance. You said you kind of happened upon your business by accident at 23. How did this unfold for you?
Yeah, so I had I was pregnant with my third baby in 2001, and obviously I had my two daughters, and I was working for the local mental health center at the time. And when I was pregnant, I realized, like, one day I was just sitting there and I'm like, I'm gonna have 3 kids in daycare. How's that going to look? What's that going to look like? Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to pay for 3 kids in daycare. And I started freaking out. And so I started doing the math and I'm like, there's no way that this is going to be worth it for me. I will literally be paying to go to work. And so I started talking to my husband about it and I was like, this isn't going to work. Like, we're going to have to figure something out. And so when I had the baby, then I was like, I started thinking about it again. And I was like, do I really cut ties? Like, do I really quit my job? And so we ultimately decided I had no choice because there was just no way I could pay for daycare. So I went and put my 2-week notice in and let them know that I wasn't going to be coming back from maternity leave. And my coworker happened to put her notice in earlier that week. And we were the only two that did that particular job. And they were like, all right, well, we can't be without somebody. So would you be willing to do the work from home if we let you, take it home or whatever? And this is in 2001. So working from home was not that prevalent at that time. And so I was like, heck yeah, of course, who's going to say no to that? So I started to work with them as an employee from home, but then the doctor that worked at that facility caught wind of what I was doing, and he was actually leaving to go start his own business in a different state. And he's like, hey, I heard you're doing this remotely and I'm going to be moving to a different town. I don't know anybody there. I don't know what the needs are going to be like. Would you be willing to do this for me? Like, if I send you the stuff via email, would you be willing to do that? And I'm like, well, heck yeah, and that's how my business started.
Oh,
Yeah. So
yeah,
then once I
that was
started
by
working,
accident.
it was by accident. I had no clue that this was even a possibility that I could do. So when I started working with him, I was like, if I can do it for him, I might be able to do it for other people. And then it happened. I was at an appointment with my daughter, and they were asking family history, and I told them what I did, and he like stopped, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, you do that?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he's like, "Do you have room for one more?" And I was, "Well, I can." And lo and behold, I had my second client. So it was, yeah, I mean, it was literally accidental. But then I realized like what power that had and how I was able to grow that. And now here we are 23 years later and I'm still doing it. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's amazing. Tell me a little more about what you were doing initially when, you at your employer, your initial employer, and then the gentleman who was leaving and was like, "Oh, can you do this and this?" What kind of
Yeah,
stuff were you doing?
sure. So at my job, I was a medical records clerk. So my job was to pull all the charts and get them all ready for the appointments. And that was like in the morning. And I was the person that would get people any type of report that they needed, download it, whatever. But then also the other part of my job was to do the transcription for the mental health clinic. So There was myself and my coworker. We were the two that did all of the transcription for the company. Once she left, I was the only one doing it. And it stayed that way for over 10 years. So I was doing transcription is what I was doing for them and then for the clients moving forward. So, and that's what I'm still doing today is the transcription. So, yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned too a little bit ago that, back in 2001, it was not common for people to work remotely, work at home. And then you also have these 3 little kids that you're wrangling. How did you do that?
So what I realized quickly when I started working with the first doctor was that he didn't want to pay me for my time because obviously if you're being paid for your time, it's easy to gouge that. It's easy to say, oh, it took me an hour for something that was a half an hour. And he didn't want to do that. And so we wanted to come up with a way, and I didn't want to keep track of my hours because I've got 3 kids. So we came up with the idea that I was going to work on productions. Whatever reports he would send me, I would get paid X amount per report. So I started to realize then that the faster that I got and the more efficient that I got, the more shortcuts that I took with like text expanders and templates and things like that, the more money I could make in less time. And so as I started to do that and I really started to focus on making that happen, I was able to replace my full-time income in about an hour and a half a day working for this doctor. Anything over the hour and a half, then it was more money than I had made at my full-time job. So I was able to make a full-time income in less than 2 hours a day, hour and a half, 2 hours. I started to pick up more clients along the way. Obviously, I got that second doctor, started picking up more, but I still to this day never work more than 20 hours a week. And generally I do it nap times, bedtime. It's very common that I'll be up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning just because that's when I get my burst of energy. I'm left alone. The world is asleep. And so that's really how I've been able to manage it. It was staying out of the hourly pay. That was the biggest thing is stop selling my time. And that made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, man, that's huge. That's a huge key too for anybody who is, wanting to do something similar or just like being able to utilize your time management skills were obviously insane, great. And as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, that's an entrepreneur right there. So that's awesome. Good for you, Tara. Okay, so you said baby number 3 or child number 3, and you mentioned husband. So when did you meet your husband and how old were you when you got married?
So we actually met before I had my first child. So my first child is not his, but we were friends. And then I had my daughter. And then when I was pregnant, he was one of the only ones that like still hung around and was very supportive and whatnot. And then we started dating 2 months after she was born, and we've been together ever since. But we were together for 7 years before we actually got married. And he was from a divorced, he had divorced parents. And so he was very skeptical and worried about getting married. And so that was kind of, why there was a delay. But then he had a heart attack at the age of 26. And so, after that happened, it was like, okay, you almost left me with, 3 kids and we're not married. I would have been screwed, with the house, with everything. And so finally we were like, all right, well, this is serious now. So 2 weeks later we got married. And that was 23 years ago. Yeah. And that really pushed. So I started freelancing. I quit my job. I started freelancing in May of 2001. So the baby was born in March 2001. I quit my job. I started freelancing in May 2001. He had his heart attack in November 2001. So it was at that point that I was like, okay, I've got to this is for real. Like when I came home that night after it happened, he flatlined in the hospital. I barely got him to the hospital. There's like a whole story with that, but I barely got him to the hospital. He flatlined. They had to do CPR. They had to do the paddles. They had to do the whole 9 yards. And so when I came home that night, obviously he was staying in the hospital and his boots were there and his vehicle was there. And I was like, I could have came home tonight to a completely different situation. And so what happens if now I don't have his income? Because now he can't go to work for a while. What does this look like? And so it was at that point that I realized like I had to make this freelancing thing work because I needed to make money, but I also needed to be available for my kids. Like there was no ifs, ands, or buts at this point. And so it was then that I was like, all right, we're turning up the heat on this. And so it was within, I don't know, a year or two, I had up to 7 clients, still not working more than 20 hours a week though. But it was, it was increasing. Like I realized like how to make an offer, and that's different than being paid on production. And so um that's really what ended up happening and kind of fueled that fire. So, yeah, it's been a ride, let me tell you.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so much more to the story we haven't even got to yet. Okay, I do have another question though. So you initially, when you were doing the business, you had two, and then you said you got seven total. So how did you get the additional five?
The additional kit or the clients, you mean?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I actually started just letting my current clients know that I was available if they knew anybody else. So my daughter's doctor referred me to a professor that was at the college at the University of North Dakota, and he was doing like case studies and things like that. So he needed somebody, so that was a client. I started my aunt knew somebody, so she connected me with someone. So that was like the fourth client. And then there were a few that I had connected with through like a medical transcription job board at the time. And I connected with them and I was able to secure them. And then it got to a point, I think like the final two clients I got from, I just Googled like facilities that specialized in the type of transcription that I did. And I did it for my state. And there were a couple of facilities down in Minneapolis. I'm in Minnesota. And I called them, and one of them was like, "Oh, we don't need anybody right now, but can I keep your information on file?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And I figured, well, that's just a nice way of saying thanks, but no thanks. But literally almost a year to the day that I had called him or emailed him, he emailed me and said, "Hey, we have a need. Are you still available to do this?" And I was like, "Yeah." And that was 10 years ago, and I'm still working with them.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really cool. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Okay, so you've got all these clients, and then you from what we know, you have these three children, and you and your husband, you decide, okay, let's go ahead and get married, and then you decide to have additional children because we got to rewind the story too. You said you never wanted a kid, and now here we are with three. So obviously you love that they were huge blessings. At what point did you two decide, let's have more?
So it was, I think after the third baby came along, probably 2 or 3 years down the road, I wanted to have another one. And he was like, "Absolutely not. We're good. Three is enough. We're fine." And I finally wore him down after a few years. So number three and number four are 7 years apart. So I finally wore him down. He agreed. I got pregnant pretty much right away. And then the next one was an oops 2 years later. So I got pregnant like 15 months later or whatever it was. Oopsie. Had her. And then the same scenario. Oopsie. And then again. And then that one though ended up number seven was born with Down syndrome. We didn't that was a birth diagnosis. Like we had no idea during the pregnancy until like the final week things started showing up in my news feed that started to tip me off that something might be wrong. And sure enough. And then number eight, we decided like I told him I'm like I kind of got like gypped on having like our final baby. Like number seven was supposed to be the last one, but then everything just went haywire with his health issues. And I'm like, I feel like I lost out on like having that experience, right? Of just like, this is my last baby. And, coming home from the hospital with the baby and whatnot, because he had to be life flighted. And so we agreed then that we would have one more and then that would be it. And so again, got pregnant pretty much right away and had number eight, and then I got my tubes tied. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, we've got some more digging in with all of that information that you just shared as well. So, I mentioned to you at the beginning that you homeschool your kids, and was that always something you did at the beginning, or when
No.
did that happen?
That did not happen until number seven was born. Yeah. So, the older three went to public school. public school. Okay, so I'll just kind of give you a really quick rundown. So obviously the oldest one, I was 15 when I had her. School was just a thing that we knew about, right? And so I put her in school. Second one, same thing, put her in school. The third one, though, I ended up putting him in a private Catholic school, mostly because they had all day kindergarten. And I thought that was awesome because the public school only had half day kindergarten at that time. Once he went to the private school, though, I'm like, this is so awesome. Like they have smaller class sizes. There's less bullying. There's less other junk. And so I decided then at that point that I was going to keep him there through sixth grade. And then as my daughters were in high school and we were having issues with bullying and all of the stuff in high school, they actually started doing online public school. And so they were home with me, but they were doing public school online. So it was a mix, right? I mean, they were home, but they were doing public work. And then when number 7 was born, he had so many health issues right away. And we kept landing in the hospital every single time these kids would bring something home from school. And so we ultimately decided, like, let's just pull them out at least for a year and like, let's see what happens. And so as I really started diving into like, how do I effectively homeschool? How do I do all this? I started to see like even the difference in all of their personalities going from like the ones that were in school, like seeing the difference in just the way that they interacted at home and interacted with each other and the way that they were coming at their schoolwork much more eager than when they were going to school, that I was like, there's something to this. Anyways, yeah, I ended up graduating. Number 3, he ended up coming out of school in 8th grade and I homeschooled him the rest of the way. He graduated as a homeschooler and his life trajectory was just so different. He ended up opening his first restaurant at 18. And he was able to do that because he had the ability to dive into learning the things that were interesting for him. And we tailored his education for him. So I always knew he was going to go into business. So for math, we would tailor it to, he would do business math and personal finance and things like that that would facilitate his ability to do those things when he was older. So, and yeah, here we are. I think it's 10 years now. We've been homeschooling for 10 years and I would never put my kids back in school after seeing the difference, the night and day difference between the older kids that went to school and the younger kids who did not. Like there's not even a comparison.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating. I'm curious to know too, one of the things you said was that um you tailored the education to your son who was interested in business, it was just great. And then you had mentioned too, just like the dynamics of the sibling relationship had changed. What did you see before to after once you started homeschooling?
So it was there was a lot of self-esteem issues, I think, like with the older kids, because, was always trying to fit in. You're changing who you are to be accepted by your peers, and, wanting to have your peers as friends was a really big deal because you're with these people 8 hours a day. You have to fit in. Whereas when I pulled them out, they didn't have to, they weren't having to alter who they were to fit in. And they also weren't having to, I say now, survive those 7 to 8 hours a day where they have to be with their friends. So once they were home and they were just not facing that pressure anymore, they were able to be themselves and they were all able to like be friends with each other because they didn't have their friends like, we don't want to hang out with your stupid brother, when we come to your house. And, just those things that happen and did happen with the older kids. And so that just really changed the dynamic then. It was like they were all each other's friends then versus being able to be themselves versus having to conform to fit in with whatever friends would accept them in school. And number 4 had gone to school up until through first grade. He went to school K and first, and he would come home every day, and I'd say, how was your day at school? I don't know, nobody wanted to play with me. And he was just deflated every single time he would come home. Whereas then once we started homeschooling, it was like he didn't have to worry about that because he had all of his siblings, older siblings, younger siblings, everybody, they would all go play together and they would go and explore outside and they would do all these things. And it just took that pressure off. They still had socialization, obviously, they would be in activities and they would be in different things, but it was just that it was a completely different dynamic. So, yeah.
Well, I'm glad it's been such a positive experience for your kids and for you as well. Well, I want to kind of go to the part of your story where in your seventh child, your pregnancy, seventh pregnancy, during this time, your husband had a stroke. So what happened that caused this stroke, and then what was the aftermath?
Yeah, so he actually was working as a heavy equipment operator. So he was working for a local company and he was running the the loader or whatever. He had to sneeze and he held it in because it was like so forceful and he had his hands like on the levers running it. He couldn't take his hands off the thing and he didn't want it to go all over the window when he sneezed. You know how that is. And so he held it in and he felt something snap immediately when he did that. And his throat immediately started to hurt and he just didn't know what in the world. So he finished out his shift. He came home that day. He told me what happened. And he's like, it's the weirdest thing. He's like, whenever I swallow, it hurts so bad. And I was like, well, you should probably go to the doctor. So a day or two later, he went to the doctor. They're like, well, you can't snap anything in your neck. You're probably fine. And so he's like, well, whatever. But about swallowing. And 3 days later, he woke up to go to work and he tripped over the baby gate. Like he couldn't lift his leg up over the baby gate. And we're like, all right, that's not normal. And just felt funny. So he called into work and said he wasn't going to be able to make it in. And he went back to bed like a dummy. We're like, why did you go back to bed? Wait, 3 hours later, 4 hours later, he was sweating profusely, but he was not running a fever. He was actually cold. It was like his temperature was like 93 to, you're not 93. What is it? What is the temperature? 98.6. Yeah, it was like 93, 94 degrees. And we're like, well, that's not right. And so we went to the ER and they hooked him up to all the things. And we're thinking another heart attack, you know?
Yeah.
And it was not another heart attack. He was having atrial fibrillation is what was happening. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's when the heart is beating irregularly. And so they thought then that, we better observe you. And then it was in the middle of the night while he was in the hospital that he said everything like went sideways and he was vomiting and all of this. And so when I went to the hospital, I was like, that sounds like a stroke. This is not right. So I called his doctor and they did a scan and sure enough, I had a shower of blood clots. So he had a stroke in the cerebellum and he couldn't walk. Like he lost his ability to be able to walk, which was scary. Able to get that back pretty quickly though. He was in the hospital only a few days. He had to come home with a walker. He had to go to rehab. But about a week or 2 weeks after he had been home from the hospital, I noticed that his speech was starting to slur and he was starting to get like this tremor in his arm. And we're like, okay, well, those aren't normal. We better go back to the hospital in case you're having another stroke. And they did a scan and they realized that he was having it wasn't a stroke, but it was a bleed. The blood thinners that they gave him to break up the stroke, it was like settling in the part where he had the stroke. And so it was pooling there. And so it ended up causing speech difficulties, which is where the slurring was coming from. And it also triggered him to have an intention tremor in his dominant arm. So anyways, he basically lost, a regular use of his dominant arm. And even after therapy, and all of that, he was not able to get that back. And he also had like the brain fog and the inability to pay attention really well. So it would have been dangerous for him to actually try to go back to work in that capacity. And so he ended up being disabled. He's been home on disability for 10 years. So it's been kind of crazy. So,
Man.
yeah. And then now he just went through cancer. So
Golly.
I know it's like it was, he was 26 when he had his heart attack, 37 when he had a stroke, and 48 when he had cancer. So like every 10 to 11 years, we're like waiting for the ball to drop. So it's been crazy. But everything that we've gone through though has served a purpose and has brought along a lesson. And so we've never gone through any of these trials or tribulations like as the victim. We're always like, okay, what's this for? What's this teaching us? And so when he had his stroke, then was disabled, and then we had number 7 like a few months later. And everything was timed out so impeccably, shall we say, that we're like, no one else could have planned this but God. Like, there's no other story that could have been written here, because with my husband being disabled, he was able to be home with the kids while I was at the hospital with the baby. And had I not been, he would not be here. Like, our son would have died in the hospital if I couldn't have been there, because of the mistakes and things that happened just because the hospital was busy. Things happened. And so it was just one of those things where it was meant to be. So yeah, it's kind of it's been wild.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yeah.
So, okay, so he wasn't working because he was on disability, and he was able to obviously take care of the kids. So then you touched a little bit on when you had your 7th baby. I'd like you to just share a little bit of, what happened. You also said, you said too a little bit ago that when, as you were getting closer to the due date, you started noticing like that there could be potential indicators, but you really didn't find out until birth.
It's interesting. So I obviously had 6 typical pregnancies up to this point. I got really big with all of them. I got really uncomfortable with all of them. I was waddling by the time I was 30 weeks. Just not having the same type of pregnancy, not grow as quickly. I was not waddling, was feeling pretty decent. I wasn't super uncomfortable. It was a different pregnancy overall. And what's fascinating is that I knew that were certain soft markers for kids that had Down syndrome. And for the prior 3 pregnancies, I was always asking the ultrasound technician, like, how is the growth on everything? What's the size of the femur? Because that's like a soft marker. And for whatever reason, this time around, I forgot to ask. So it just never dawned on me to ask for whatever reason. And yes, things started to show up in my newsfeed about Down syndrome, and which is weird. I wasn't searching for it. I didn't have any inclination or worry for any reason up to that point. And then all of a sudden, it started to show up, and then it kept showing up, and it kept showing up, and I noticed it, and I was like, huh, wonder if then wonder if this is a sign to let me know to be prepared. And nothing about my pregnancy up to that point had been typical. So I went in for a checkup. I was 35 when I had him. So they were doing more ultrasounds. They were doing more checkups more often because I was of advanced maternal age, what they call that. So I had gone in at one point, everything looked good. I went in a couple days later, and I almost canceled this appointment because I had work to do for clients that I was trying to wrap up before I was going to have the baby. And something just was like, nope, just take the work with you. Just go get the scan done. And it was a good thing I did, because I remember I got up to the room for them to do the stress test after the ultrasound, and I could hear like running down the hall, and it was my doctor. And he comes in the room and he's like, we need to induce you like today. Like, you got to have the baby today. And here I had lost almost all my amniotic fluid from the prior appointment. I wasn't leaking. It just like evaporated. It was just a thing. It was like almost gone. So he's like, you have to deliver. And so he was like, you need to go where the NICU is. So I had to go to a different hospital, different town. And everything kind of was leading up to there's going to be something wrong. So when I delivered him, it took them about 6 minutes to get him to breathe and to cry. And so I knew mother's instinct, and then they kind of, once they got him breathing, they kind of put him up to me and they set him here very briefly while they were still holding him because they knew they were going to whisk him away to the NICU. And I looked at him and it was one look at him and I knew but it wasn't shock, it wasn't disappointment. It wasn't because I had been getting these messages for the week and it was just the strangest thing, but it was like a preparation. But I was not shocked. It was just very, very weird.
What is his name?
Sure.
Carter. Okay. So you have Carter and then they have to whisk him away to the NICU. and and you remained in the hospital with him for a really long time. So what happened?
He actually had to be life flighted to Minneapolis, which is 5 hours away from home. They were like, we can't treat him here. He's got an issue with his intestine. His intestines didn't like connect and form properly. It's called a duodenal atresia. He needed surgery because there was no way for, fluids to pass through. They had to repair it. And so they had to life flight him. So they took him that night, life flighted him that night while I was still in the hospital. And so then I was able to be released the next day. And then I went home and I made arrangements, with the family. Luckily, my older kids now, my daughter is pregnant. My daughter is like going to be giving birth in 6 weeks after I had Carter. So we were pregnant at the same time. She's 21 at this point, 2021 at this point. She, so we were getting everything ready and she was planning on driving me down to Minneapolis so that my husband could stay home with the kids. And my second daughter, she was 16, I think, at this point. So she's got the ability to drive. So she was able, so they stepped in and obviously were able to, help at this point. So then I went down to Minneapolis and we were in the hospital for 3 weeks. And we came home for a period of time. Then we ended up having to go back like another month or two later because he had jaundice really bad and they had to do a liver biopsy. We were there for 10 days. Came home. He had to go to open heart surgery a couple months later. So at 4 months old, he's having open heart surgery. We were there for the 8 days that they figured we would be. We came home. Within a day, he started acting very strange. Anyways, he ended up with an infection in his incision. He had to be life flighted back. So we had to go back again. And we were there for like 3 weeks for that time. This summer then, after we finally came home, we went this summer. Everything was good. Started having weird symptoms again, having to go back. He had a diaphragmatic hernia that popped up. So his bowels were coming up into his chest. So he had to have surgery for that. It was supposed to be an outpatient surgery, but they were like, well, we're going to keep you overnight because you're so far away from home. There was complications and we ended up being there for 5 weeks. And those were the times where he almost died. And so that was crazy. But it was that hospital stay that ended up being the catalyst for me to figure out going all in on the homeschooling, but then also some of the experiences that we had at that hospital stay with seeing other kids there by themselves is what ultimately prompted me then to start my coaching business. That was an eye opener to what so many families go through on a regular basis that people don't realize other people are going through.
So you're there at the hospital and one, you're advocating for your child's health and well-being because you said that he could have died multiple times. So in those, and then I do want to get to your coaching business too, but in those situations, was it just negligence of the staff or was it just they're so busy and then you're noticing inconsistencies?
So the one instance was that I was on a feeding tube. So he was on a respirator and he was also on a feeding tube because he obviously couldn't eat. He's on a respirator. They've got him sedated. And so they've got him on a feeding tube. And I remember one evening and I was like, how much is he getting? And they told me what he's getting. And I'm like, well, why not more? And they're like, well, if he gets more, his stomach could fill up, he could vomit or aspirate. We don't want that. So we have to give him a very minimal amount so that he can digest it, as it's going. Next morning, I happened to notice that it was at double the rate they told me it was the night before. And I'm like, why is it double? They told me that he can't have more than that, or he could potentially have issues. So I called the nurse and she's like, oh my goodness, I don't know what happened. It's not supposed to be that much. And so she had to shut it off and press all the buttons and put it back to where it was supposed to be. And I'm like, okay, good, and I'm sitting there and I'm working in the room at the time. And so I'm sitting there for a little bit and I happen to look back over at the machine and it's back up to the double amount again. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? So I call her back in again and she had to shut everything off again and whatnot. But, the nurses, they can't be in their patients' rooms all the time because they're taking care of 3 patients. So had I not been there, he would have been continuing to get double the feed he was supposed to, which would have caused a potential aspiration issue, pneumonia, death, anything. Second scary incident that happened with that hospital stay was he was on the respirator for way longer than he should have been because they were so busy. It was flu and RSV season, where they were full. So they didn't get to spend a whole lot of time like trying to figure out what was wrong. It was like they'd come in, they do the x-ray daily. Oh, there's no improvement, but with Down syndrome, kids with Down syndrome apparently have a tendency to use to their meds and any sort of anesthesia. And so they need more and more to keep them sedated. And so basically what was happening was they wanted him to breathe on his own, but the more narcotics they gave him made it more difficult. And so I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm like, how are we ever going to get out of this catch-22 goal if you don't start doing something to get him off of this respirator? So finally, a different doctor came on shift and he was like, all right, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And he took him off the respirator, was doing great. Then he took a nap and I noticed he wasn't waking up. I'm like, what is going on? So I'm trying to wake him up and I'm, trying to talk to him and I'm, pulling up his eye and I'm, whatever. And so I called the nurse and I'm like, he's not waking up. Something's wrong. And so she called the doctor. They did the labs. Well, here they had forgotten to decrease his narcotic dosage. So basically he was suffocating on his own carbon dioxide because it was suppressing his respiratory system so much that it couldn't push out the carbon dioxide. So he was going into what they call narcosis, which is, narcotic induced, basically suffocation. So they had to actually get, they had to do CPR on him then, and they had to do that manual bagger over his mouth so that they could pump a whole bunch of oxygen into his lungs to get him to release all that carbon dioxide. And so, again, the nurse was outside of the room. It was only because I'm sitting here trying to wake him up and arouse him that he woke up. If I wouldn't have been there, they would have just assumed he was sleeping. Oh, that was, yeah. I mean, and here's all of these, I'd go, they have glass pods in the hospital. So you can see into all of the other rooms. And there's all these kids there by themselves. Infants, toddlers, elementary age kids, and they're all there by themselves because mom and dad had to leave to go back to work. And some of these kids are there long term. And I just couldn't help but think like how many mistakes are happening because these doctors and nurses are human and they're busy and they can't be in these rooms all the time. But, I just could not imagine not being there and being that advocate and just was, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's getting to me, Tara. I'm just thankful that you were there for your sweet baby. And you're watching these other children who can't advocate for themselves and their parents aren't there. And you're noticing like this is a problem. Like why are these parents not here? Like you said, they're working. They've got to pay for all these hospital bills in their life. And so you're watching this happening. And so you think, something needs to be done with this. And so what did you decide needed to happen?
Well, I just sat there and I just thought, there's all these, I would actually have some of the nurses would come into my room and they or into my son's room and they would, what are you working on? And how does this work? And they would talk about, their nurses and their children were having issues and they were working 12-hour shifts and some were traveling nurses and, they had to be there and they have to put food on the table. And they would talk about some of the experiences of other parents. And I was like, I wish I could figure out a way to like share with all of these parents that, they don't have to choose. Like they could find a remote job. They could start their own business. Like they have options, because there's so many people that just didn't think that there's options available. And so I really started just tossing around this idea after this had happened with my son. And we were in the final week of the hospital stay. And thing happened that just like sent that thought over the edge. I remember seeing a breaking news alert in my news feed on Facebook that grandpa and his 2-year-old grandson had fallen through the ice with an ATV or whatever, and it said that the child was being life flighted to where we were. And sure enough, 10 to 15 minutes later, I heard the helicopter, and I could see the helicopter. We were up on the top floor at this point, and I was like adjacent to the helicopter pad. And so I could see them come and land, and came in. And I remember at one point I had gone down to the cafeteria to get food, and the child's like the cafeteria and the ER were really close to each other. So I could hear the chaos. I could see the family kind of down the hallway or whatever, I mean, they're on their knees and they're praying and they're crying and they're screaming and all of this stuff. And I just remember like thinking, kind of stuff happens all the time. Like this stuff happens all the time. Things you don't expect, And I went home that day or like the next day, and I remember checking in on news or whatever, and it had said that the both of them had passed away, the grandfather and the 2-year-old. And I was like, no, that is, I can't imagine now being that parent who now has to bury your child, right? And back to work and just act like everything's normal. And it was that had pushed over the edge. Like I need to figure out what to do. But before that, to back up, just one more story that I forgot to tell you that was really a really big deal. When we were in my son's room, the nurse had come in and was like shutting the curtains because again, class pod, and she was shutting the curtains, and a nurse across the hallway was shutting the curtains. And I was like, what is going on? And I had been seeing a lot of people come in and out of the room next door for like the previous few days. And she basically said that they were donating the child's organs, that the child wasn't making it. And all the family was coming to say goodbye, and they were going to do a hero walk, and they were trying to give the family privacy. And at that point, obviously, I knew that my son was going home. He was fine, he had recovered or whatever. But I just, between those two instances of knowing that these parents had to bury their child, and I'm like, in the case of an emergency where it's something that blindsides you and you don't expect it to happen, or in the case of the child who is dying, know that they're not going to make it, and yet you somehow are supposed to tear yourself away to go work 8 to 9 hours a day every day. Just like, how does one do that when your child is in the hospital? How does one do that? But you still have to pay the bills. You still got to put groceries on the table. So I was like, I have to do whatever it takes to get this message to parents that they have options, whether they just want to be home with their kids because they want to be, because they need to be, because something happened, because they have a special needs child, whatever. Like I want to help them figure out a way to create something for them that's going to fit into their lifestyle. And so that is how I decided then I started the work from home revolution. And then I've added in Freelancers on Fire. And that's really kind of those stories, those reasons are the catalyst of why I did what I did. And it's hard for me because I don't like being on video, and I'm like, I have to get out of my comfort zone. I have to do whatever I need to do because this is that important. And being that person that experienced that and watching it, I was just like, lucky enough to not have to go through that grief, but I went through, this horrible situation where you feel so out of control. And the one thing that I did have control of was my work, my paycheck. And I didn't have to worry about not being able to pay the bills while also being able to be in the room with my son. So I mean, live in a world where everybody wants to fit us into the same box, and lives are as different as snowflakes. All we all deserve to be able to build a life that works for us with our circumstances, because we never know what hand we're going to be dealt. So I just think it's important for everybody to know they have choices, whether that's public school, private school, homeschool, online school, working a traditional 9 to 5, starting a business, remote work, like whatever. And people don't realize that they can mix and match what their life looks like versus following the same path that been told we have to follow.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's just huge that you were there, you were in it, you see these issues with the hospital system, and your heart's breaking for these families because, you saw the loss that people experienced and you didn't know if that was going to happen. And yet, as you said, you were able to get to leave. And so you have this desire and this passion to create this business. You already had your business, but to create this coaching business. And so when they come to you, when women come to you and they receive your coaching, are you walking them through how to find something? Is it because, there's all different, like you said, all different types of opportunities and jobs? Kind of walk us through a little bit of what your services offer and how you can help these women.
So the Freelancers on Fire, really, for me, it's all about finding a business that works for each individual person. Because while all businesses work, they don't work for everybody or for everybody's circumstance. And so I think it is key to start a business with skills that they already have or skills that they are interested in. Because it doesn't matter how much money you could make. It doesn't matter how easy someone makes a business sound. If it does not align with your personality or your skills, you are not going to be able to make that business work. So when people come to me, I have a framework that I go through with them to help them identify their unique skills. And then I help them figure out what business or businesses that they could start that align with those skills and those circumstances and their personality. Then they get to decide from there which one sounds like the best fit. And then that's what we build out.
How did you come up with the framework?
Experience over time, not only for myself and way that I analyze things, but also from seeing the people that I have worked with over time, seeing a lot of the struggle. So we see a lot of times like showing up in our newsfeed, come be a bookkeeper, come be a web designer, come start an Amazon store. Like we're enticed with all of these opportunities. And what I find it so often happens that and buy into these things and then the business doesn't work. Well, it's not because they're incapable. Know that. It's because it's not the right business model for them. So over the years of doing this, I've noticed there's so many that go after the wrong thing. They're going after the promise of money versus the realization that you need to go after what is sustainable, because the money is going to be there if the business is sustainable. So it's just been a lot of working with women, talking with people, seeing what they've tried and what hasn't worked. Also going through that same process for myself, because I've freelanced, I've done ghostwriting as well. I have made, $20,000 in 20 days as a ghostwriter and getting clients and contracts, but I did not like it. I did not enjoy it. I would dread doing the work. And so lessons, I've started an e-commerce store. I've done all of these different things. So I come at it from a different perspective of being like, okay, this is what this business takes. This is what this business takes. If your circumstances are like this, then this one isn't going to work for you. So I come at it with experience, but also knowledge, talking with other people and seeing what's worked for them, and surrounding myself with other women that are doing service-based businesses or other people that have done e-commerce or coaching or whatnot, and just being diverse in who I surround myself with. And that's really helped to be able to put those pieces together. So my framework has changed over the years. It's gotten stronger, but yeah, trial and
Yeah,
error.
it sounds like a great opportunity, especially for somebody who is looking to get out and try something new, try to get out on their own, to meet up with you. Could you share where people can find you?
They can go to freelancersonfire.com, or they can follow me or find me on Facebook, Tara Bushaw. I'm under my personal profile. So on Instagram and TikTok, but I don't generally post there. Facebook is usually where I'm at. But the beauty of any of this is that you can do it at any age. I know you had said that you like to help women, shine a light on what they can do, at any point. And something like business, as you can start at any time because you're not under anybody else's timeline or experience, and you get to build it on your own. So I think that's one of the unique things that we have. There's no age discrimination when you're starting your own business.
Right, right. Even though and I feel like this is more just as we get older, people view that and think like, I missed my boat. I can't do it. It's too difficult. It's too hard. And really I interviewed someone earlier today and she was saying it's the belief that it's too hard, because if you believe it's too hard, it's going to be too hard. But in reality, it's not. You can do it and push through it. Well, Tara, I want to ask you my final question. And then I'll let you go. So this is the question that I ask all of my guests, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you say. If you could encourage one woman who does feel blocked to pursue her dream or her goal based on her age or life circumstance, and so you had a lot of life circumstances that happened to you, and then also at your age, a young mom and then a young business owner at 23, and just keep going on with that. What could you say to encourage somebody who does feel blocked?
It's never too late. We have the power to build our own destiny. And I think the box that society's tried to put us in is that, we work from whatever, 16, 17, 18 until we're like 62, and then we have to retire. And that's just the way that it's supposed to look, right? But people are living till they're 90, 100. So, if you're 62, you could still have 30 plus years on this earth. And I think it's important to live out that destiny, to go for what you want, because nobody ever says, "Oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that thing." Usually I wish I would have. And I think that that's something where, the woulda, coulda, shouldas can sometimes kill you. And so I encourage, like, if you've got the opportunity to just go for it regardless of age, because you just don't know it's going to turn into, and it could be the best thing that you ever decided to do and take a chance on. And would rather have regrets of trying and it not working than not trying at all. And I think most people could probably agree with that. So go for it. That's what I say. Go for it.
Absolutely. Well, Tara, I just appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story and getting me really emotional over there, Tara. So thank you so much for joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.